Hey everyone, welcome to the bridge. I'm Michelle Francesca Cohen, and I am so excited for my wonderful guest tonight, Aaron Tomlinson. And he has just arrived home after a flat tire and a traffic jam. He's made it, and I'm going to be looking for him in just a moment. So thank God for this opportunity to talk about such an important subject. Hello to everyone that's jumping on. Thank you for your patience, and we'll be watching out for Aaron. Oh, let me send an invitation. That's important. Hopefully we won't have any technical difficulties. So Aaron, I've sent you. Okay, you're here. If you can look for the request to join video icon, I sent you a request also. So if you can't see it from the desktop, take a look and see if you can find the invitation. I have no idea where it actually lands. I never have known that. I've never been on the receiving end of this. So go ahead and see if you can find that. If you're having trouble, we may have to switch to phone. We'll see. We're going to talk about self-trust tonight. Gosh, I gave it all kinds of fancy names earlier in the promo. Hearing the divine voice within, etc., etc. And I thought, why am I, not you, why am I so afraid of bringing a subject about self-trust? Self-trust is so important. We need it. It is not a derailment or a backslidden condition from our love for God or anything like that. We need self-trust. It's akin to confidence, and it's really the alignment with our inner voice. Okay, you may have to switch to phone. You don't see it. Okay, yeah, I know that's the problem with the desktop. I've found, Aaron, is that it just doesn't have the option to request to join the video. So we'll hang on here, and if you need us to restart, we can do that. Hey, Tender Anna, thanks for everyone that's jumping on. I've seen a few names pop up. We're just going to let Aaron go ahead and switch to phone. You're being a trooper tonight, my friend. Thank you so much for dealing with all that you've had to deal with in the last hour. It's kind of funny. I can imagine you sort of showing up on the other side of the screen. Your hair's like all like crazy and all the rest of it. Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk about self-trust. Aaron is one of my favorite people, one of y'all's favorite people. That's so Texan, wasn't it? Y'all's favorite people to have these conversations every week, the bridge, because he's so knowledgeable. He is a psychologist. He's a professional counselor. This is information that we need to be able to thrive well in our world. So I'm just going to give a definition to self-trust. Well, first of all, trust is essentially relying on or placing confidence in the integrity or surety of something or someone, relying on them to act in your best interests, right? It's not them putting your interests above theirs. It's not them trying to make you happy, but it's trust is when you're placing your confidence in someone to act in your best interests. And self-trust then is relying on yourself to act in your own best interests. Now that's pretty important, isn't it? And I think we've touched on this before, talking about great, he's there, super. No greater love has, and he lay down his life for his friends. And I think that the Greek word, if I can remember correctly off the top of my head, is to themi. And it's not talking about being a doormat. It's talking about being establishing our life for our friends. That's what we're doing. That's what Jesus gave us the example of. My goodness, if there's anyone in history who has demonstrated self-trust, it has to be Son of Man, Son of God, Jesus, because if he wasn't sure about who he was and what he was capable of, we wouldn't have seen any of those miracles that we saw. So self-trust is such an important thing for us to talk about. Okay, I see that it says adding, it's pulsing, but as yet, Erin is not materializing on the other side of the screen, a la Star Trek. So let's just, oh, no answer from the live video guest. This is not an uncommon problem these days. And this is where I start to sound like the Home Shopping Network, where they talk about, I know it's so frustrating, where they talk about an item for sale for about 30 minutes with no breath in between. Just moving from how its color and its texture and what have you. So anyway, try again, Erin. I'm doing this. I'm giving it another shot. I saw another thing. It does sometimes take a minute for the hamster on the wheel to get a good run. Hey, fantastic.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Oh, this is so great. I was beginning to sound like the Home Shopping Network, and you.
I know. I'm so sorry.
No, it's hilarious. I'm used to it. I really am. You're here. This is amazing. You just endured a flat tire.
I'm dizzy because I didn't have a chance to set up the tripod for the phone, so
hey.
I'm holding it. So I'll try not to make people dizzy.
Okay. Yeah. Cloverfield. That's great. Oh gosh, thanks, Erin, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's such an important topic, isn't it? Self-trust. I was just saying that I was giving it all kinds of fancy names in the promo, and I'm like, stop it already. Why are we so ashamed of self-trust? You know, as though it was something irreverent. You know, and I don't want to just start kicking in at the sort of, you know, the whole religious thing, but, you know, if self-trust is relying on yourself to act in your own best interests, we need to develop some of that, right? When you think of self-trust, what do you think about?
Yeah, that's, you know, it's a tough one because we're going to make mistakes. And I think what we tend to do is we tend to magnify our mistakes when we make them, when really they're learning opportunities, right? And so, yeah, if we make mistakes, like I always tell people, because I am a counselor, I heard you say that part. But, you know, there's a proverb that says, counsel in the heart of man is like deep waters, and a person of understanding will draw it out. So the idea of counseling is to draw out what's already inside of someone. So one of the things that, you know, I learned in my life was there were times I did not trust myself. I did not trust my intuition. I had that sort of yucky gut feeling, you know, I shouldn't do this. And I would get talked into it because other people would tell me, oh, well, yes, you should. And especially when you're younger, you're listening to older people. If you have respect for them, which I think we should, you tend to sometimes go against yourself and do what other people expect you to do. And one of the things I realized was that I made a lot of mistakes that were not my mistakes. They were somebody else's mistakes that I imported because of their own lack of judgment or discernment or whatever about what was going on in my life, or I took them too seriously. And so one of the things I've had to learn to do is own my decisions. I still believe in getting counsel. I think it's really important because I think, you know, people can see stuff that we can't see. They can be more objective at times, but at the end of the day, we still have to own the decision. Like, I'm making this decision as a conscious choice because it's what I feel is the right thing to do, or because I want to do, or I want to follow this person's counsel, but I'm owning the decision. So then I'm not going to come back on that person if it doesn't work out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So really we can sort of like sort the data and the information that we get from the council around us, but ultimately we've got to be able to bring it home and sort it out and go. So I mean, that is like a topic that I think everyone is so keen to refine down, right? When you've got all your information around you, and then you're having to make a decision, you're having to weigh something up. What are you looking for in order to be able to make, and I want to say not the perfect decision, because there probably isn't one, but the one that's right for you?
Yeah. So this is where like the intuition part of it kind of gets into it. So again, what I would say is when I feel congruent about a decision.
Yeah.
And by congruent, what I mean is there's not conflicting, there's not ambivalence. Like ambivalence isn't, well, I don't care what happens. Ambivalence is almost, I care too much one way or the other. So I'm struggling to make this decision. So I'm not congruent. Part of me wants to do this. Part of me doesn't want to do this. Then I think that we need to go inside and look at what is it that's causing the incongruence inside. And so until, this is just how I do it, until I can resolve that incongruent part of myself, then I'm going to be slower to make decisions. Definitely slower than I was in my youth. In my youth, I was out of the blocks, so to speak, before the gun went off.
Right.
On the way to the finish line, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as I've gotten older, I've realized it's almost better to do something right the first time rather than having to course correct all the time. So what I try to do, and this is really rooted in self-trust, but I try to get to that point where I'm congruent about a decision. And then when all the parts of me agree, yeah, this is the right thing to do, then for me, that's the right time to act. Then if it doesn't work out, I'm not afraid to course correct at that point. So like you said, with the data points, so like if I get involved in something and, oh, this isn't at all what I thought it was going to be,
Right.
This didn't work out like I thought it was going to, I don't hold myself to that decision. It's one of the things Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, don't take an oath by heaven because it's God's throne, or by earth because it's God's footstool, but let your yes be yes and your no be no. And people tend to read that. Some people tend to read that as, well, I made that decision, so I've got to let my yes be yes. Whereas I see that more as Jesus telling us not to bind ourselves into positions where we're not free to change our mind.
That is so good. Wow. I knew a woman once that said yes to a job, and she stayed in it for some 20 years, and she hated every day of it. But she was so bound by that scripture that her yes had been yes, and that she had to then see it through. I was incredulous. There's got to be room, surely, for us to say, hey, wait a minute, something happened, I've shifted, I've changed, I've got new information. What's the difference between doing that and being flaky?
That's that. Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think, Michelle, if we're going to talk about self-trust, trust in any relationship generally is based on knowledge, right? So if I don't know someone, I'm not going to trust them as much as someone that I know who has proven to be dependable or reliable and trustworthy, right? So sometimes our trust can't go beyond our knowledge. So I think self-knowledge in this case is really, really important. If you know that your temperament is to, some people just value freedom. That's just what they value. And so they hesitate to make commitments because by making a commitment, they feel like they're limiting their freedom. So if you know that you have a tendency not to stick with something, then that part about yourself, then you can work with your decisions and at least be aware, you can at least be aware enough to ask yourself the question, is this me responding to the feedback that life is giving me and course correcting, or is this just my temperament to need change? Because we have different change needs too, right? So some people need change all the time, like working an assembly line job would be just almost hell for them. So they know not to take an assembly line job. You know what I'm saying? Other people manage change. They need something every 5 years, and they need something every 7 years. And if you know that about yourself, then you can realize maybe it's not the job that's the problem, or the relationship that's the problem, or the place that I'm living. Maybe I just have high change needs. So maybe what I need to do is buy a new house every 5 years or something, to kind of gratify that need for change and yet still find that place of stability in your life so that you're not doing that kind of flaky stuff. But if you don't know that stuff about yourself, if you haven't taken the time to really get to know yourself and honestly evaluate and examine your own patterns, then I think you're going to end up maybe making decisions that later on you would say, well, maybe that wasn't the best decision.
So good. Self-knowledge, then knowing yourself and being true to yourself, being true,
Right.
which for so many of us is still a work in progress, because we have lived in personality constructs that perhaps don't even reflect the truest element of who we are. I did one of my videos, prophetic insight videos, which I felt so much right now is about the emergence of the new self, or a new sense of self. We're beginning to shed those constructs. You talked about earlier about different parts of ourselves. And I think that's so important for us to recognize that we are fragmented to some degree. And the work that we're doing is essentially about integrating those fragments into a congruent whole. Yes?
Absolutely.
So will you talk about how we become fragmented and how we can, I know you have, I don't want you to repeat yourself necessarily, but how we can bring those pieces of ourselves into this cohesive integration.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So fragmentation, it's kind of a complex thing, because one of the things that's really helped me is understanding neuroscience and how the brain works. That's really helped me with spirituality in a lot of ways. So your brain is designed to fragment information. And here's what I mean by that. Like because your brain's designed to learn, then there are different parts of your brain that take over certain tasks and learning. So if you think about your children or your grandchildren, like you had to teach them everything, right? Like I remember thinking, my God, when are my kids going to learn to eat? Like, when am I not going to have to feed them anymore? Or when are they going to learn to go to the bathroom by themselves? And so you have to, as a parent, you're guiding them every step of the way, because their brain is developing that pattern. So many things that we do now, we just do automatically, like driving, for example. Like I remember teaching, my kids aren't old enough to have their learner's permits yet or anything, but I taught some of my nieces and nephews, and I was well down the road in driving. And it was amazing how much I forgot that I didn't know. Like, that I would forget to tell them, and then almost get in a wreck and be like, oh no, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you to check your blind spot when you're changing lanes or whatever, right? Because it's just automatic. And so your brain's designed to be efficient so that you can learn something and then get to a level of what educators call unconscious competence. Where you're just able to do it, like riding a bike. Like, you don't have to think about how to keep your balance and how to brake and how to turn and all that stuff, but you have to think about all that stuff when you're first learning. So there is a part of your brain that takes that on. So we understand that sort of fragmentation. So like, I could get on a bike, not even have to think about it. I can think about other stuff while I'm riding a bike, because my brain automatically knows how to do that. So I have a fragmented piece that knows how to ride a bike, or I have a fragmented piece that knows how to drive, or how to walk, how to eat, right? So you can just do that stuff. You don't have to give any conscious effort to it at all. Well, the same thing happens in relationships. The same thing happens in every area of life. So you're going to be fragmented in that sense, in that your brain is going to adopt patterns and habits and beliefs. Well, if you were traumatized, especially if you have what we might call complex trauma. So complex trauma develops when you're in a traumatic situation that you can't get out of. So the kid who's being bullied in school in the 6th grade, like, they have to get up every morning and go face the bullies or face the teacher that they hate and whatever. And their brain is sending them signals, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe. And so there's a part of them that adapts and learns. So to give it another simple example, I know not to touch a hot stove, right? And if you're learning, like, I always tell my kids, if you don't listen to me, now they're still real little, so this is with basic life stuff. If you don't listen to me, life will eventually correct you. So if you keep, if I tell you don't touch the hot stove, you finally touch the hot stove, your brain's going to learn pretty quickly, don't do that again. Well, what happens when that happens with a primary caregiver, or when that happens in social settings, or that happens with trauma. So your brain learns that certain things aren't safe,
Yeah.
maybe. And so that part of your brain then, just like riding a bicycle or driving a car, takes over that area of your life. So let's just take a young girl who's maybe repeatedly sexually abused. And so her brain begins to believe men aren't safe. Sex isn't safe. Your body is shameful or whatever. Well, so then later on in life, you may end up avoiding relationships or having problems in relationships because that sort of fragmented piece of you is just going into that sort of unconscious competence, right?
Yeah.
So the truth is you're not broken. The truth is you work perfectly well. The problem is sometimes your programming, if you will, becomes outdated.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think, because if the truth is we have different ego states. So I have a certain ego state that operates as a dad. I have a certain ego state that operates as a counselor. When I was a pastor, I had an ego state that operated as a pastor, right? Those were all different roles that I would perform differently, but I did it enough that I became proficient at it, right? Like riding a bike. And so just being aware that we're all going to have different states of mind and emotion, different ego states that we're going to go into in different settings and different contexts. That's all part of that self-knowledge. So again, if you're going to be able to trust yourself, sometimes that starts by just observing yourself. Like, how am I in this context? What is my brain doing? What am I believing? What am I feeling when I get in these certain contexts? And then you have to ask yourself, is this serving me still? So when you're a kid, if you're in an abusive home, you don't have any power, you adopt certain ways of being in order to survive in that family. When you grow up and become an adult, now maybe you're in a different family context, you're married, whatever, and you're still operating out of some of those old learned behaviors and patterns.
Right.
So then if you're aware of that, you can make the choice to change that or adopt different patterns and ways of being in those relationships. And I think that's what we call integration. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but it's just a different way of looking at it. Instead of looking at it like myself is fractured, I was fractured by trauma, I was fractured by abuse. No, actually your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. You learned something, you learned it really well, and it's operating at a level of unconscious competence. So the answer really then is to become aware of that learning and being willing to take the risk to learn something else that's more of an updated program, if you will, right? Like installing an update on your software. You sometimes you have to update your own programming because, oh, I'm not a child anymore, or oh, I'm not in that negative situation anymore. I don't have to respond the same ways, and giving yourself the grace to say, I need to learn new ways to respond in this.
So good. So self-knowledge is just so important for self-trust and the confidence that comes with it. Do you think it helps to develop self-trust to focus on things that are easier for you to, in other words, keep relationships manageable, make sure that there's a extended timeline, not too much too soon, there's plenty of breathing space in between getting to, conversations, etc. Do you think that helps to create the space where we can watch for those patterns, learn ourselves a little bit better, and bring just a more aware conversation to the table?
Yeah, I think it's a helpful frame to think about, okay, I want to be a lifelong learner. I want to be able to respond to feedback from life. So you mentioned the lady who took the job where she was miserable for 20 years. Well, if she could see that misery as feedback, I'm not feeling fulfilled, this isn't fitting me, this isn't working, this isn't making me happy, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me or necessarily anything wrong with the job. It's just giving me feedback that's letting me know this isn't working for me, this isn't a good fit for me, and then course correcting, quit the job, find a different job.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, until you find something where you're more fulfilled.
For those who are trauma survivors who have been, or perhaps even still are, in a situation that they cannot escape, uh, there's a dulling, I think, that takes place where you cease to trust yourself because it's almost impossible to exercise, to carry it through. You know you shouldn't be in that situation, yet you are there for various different reasons and what have you. What happens to the brain when that begins to happen? I mean, I know you've got the extreme of the Stockholm syndrome where you sort of become an accomplice to your abuser. But is there a sort of a medium point before you get to that extreme where there's a dulling of your ability to trust in yourself? You can't even hear your own intuition anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, so intuition is an interesting word, because the word tuition, we use the word tuition, we typically think of paying to go to school. At least that's what we do
Right.
in America. I don't know what they do around, what they call it in other parts of the world. But tuition, originally the word meant to learn. And so intuition is internal learning. And so if you're stuck in a situation, you do have a part of your brain called the reticular activating system that adapts to new normals. And you can be, and this is where trauma, and of course, I've been pretty involved with, helping people recover from religious trauma. One of the problems with trauma survivors is, especially if you're in an abusive situation, if you're in an abusive situation where you're constantly getting messages that you're worthless, you're constantly getting messages that you're no good, you're constantly getting messages that you're just dumb, that things don't work out for you, somehow that you're fatally flawed, you don't deserve better than what you
Or that
have.
you're an object or whatever being used.
Right, yeah, exactly. So what happens then is there is a level of confidence. Confidence, I don't know why I'm on the word thing tonight, but fideo, right, is the Latin for faith.
Yeah.
So confidence means to have faith in yourself. So that's self-trust,
Yeah.
right? So if your confidence is beaten down, what can happen oftentimes with religion, like I know in my own case, I really made a strong, dedicated decision to serve the Lord coming out of trauma. And I went to a particular denomination that really liked to emphasize original sin, that we're worthless, that we're no good, the heart is deceitful and wicked, blah, blah, blah. Well, I had so much shame from all the trauma that I'd experienced that resonated with me. I thought, wow, that feels true. Right?
Right.
So there is maybe a first step for someone who's really beaten down, for somebody who really doesn't have any trust in themselves, to hear messages sometimes that we put out innocently, that's helping somebody else who isn't as traumatized. Talking about humility, for example, humility is very important, but a person who has very low self-worth, a very poor self-concept, they're not going to be able to integrate concepts of humility in a healthy way. So they really don't need to be hearing that. They really don't need to be feeding that into their consciousness. They really need sort of a nurturing presence, whether that's coming from within or coming from without, or ideally both, a support system that, builds your confidence, but you're also learning to do that from within as well. So sometimes you just need to be so validated. Like that's where the work begins. Like the work begins with validating myself, even if I make a mistake, right? Or even if I'm stuck in a difficult pattern. So for example, someone who is an addict or has an addictive personality, more and more and more research is coming out that's saying the core problem with addiction is pain and trauma. So a person is drinking, let's say, too much, not because they just want to go be a jerk, not because it's a moral issue, but because it does work to dull the pain. And so they are finding that I drink too much because I just don't want to be in pain anymore. If we can come along and validate that and say, the intention to heal is a really positive intention. And up until now, you've used alcohol to dull the pain. Let's see if we can find a different way to for you to heal, so that you're no longer using a substance to try to escape how you feel because you don't feel good on a consistent basis.
That is so compassionate. I love that.
And so feeling good is really important. Like, I mean, as a Christian, fundamentalist, before, if I heard somebody say, well, if it feels good, do it, I would think, oh my God, that's a license to sin. That's a doctrine straight from the devil. But the reality is, there can be a lot of truth to that. If you spend a lot of time trying to feel good, or at least validating, I want to feel good. Right now I'm using this substance to feel good. But I'm also waking up with a hangover. I've got 3 DUIs. I've lost jobs, so I'm creating pain over here while I'm numbing pain over here. Maybe there's a way to heal from pain over here while not creating pain over here. So the intention is positive. It's just the strategy maybe to get what you're positively intending isn't really working for you.
Right. And that's,
Or maybe you need to preserve the intention and then change the strategy.
yeah, I love that. And that supports the definition of self-trust that we used, which is relying on yourself to act in your best interests, right? Yeah.
Right.
So the goal, I guess it would just be bringing it down to, do you want to heal? Yes. How can we go about that in a way that nurtures rather than just keeps the cycle going?
Right.
Same thing, different face kind of thing. Cultivating self-trust, when we have that discord, that when we're operating in distrust of ourselves, do you believe it's important that we don't see any part of ourselves as the enemy? I think that we cannot bring ourselves into that congruence and that alignment if we're constantly seeing the war that's going on within us, that part of us is an enemy to us. It's a part of us that needs loving and caring for, or however it might be. Could you talk about that a little bit, about not regarding ourselves as an enemy?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is super, super, super important. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's so many different directions I could go with, right? So talking about that fragmentation, or talking about what in counseling we call them ego states. So sometimes those ego states don't like each other. So like one of the things that I discovered was there was a part of me that liked adventure. There was a part of me that liked new things. There was a part of me that liked the unknown. But then there was also another part of me that was afraid of being hurt and didn't like danger and wanted to play it safe, right?
That's a beautiful example. Right.
And those two parts hated each other. They hated each other because they were both afraid of each other. The part of me that wanted to play it safe was afraid the part of me that wanted adventure was going to bring a bunch of pain into my life. Oh, well, you're going to try something, you don't know what's going to happen, and you better play it safe. And if you don't play it safe, you get out there and it gets too dangerous, and you can't stay in control. If you don't know what's going to happen, you can't stay in control. And if you can't stay in control, we learned a long time ago, if you don't have the control and the power, you're going to end up getting hurt. So you are the enemy, right? And then that other part of me was like, you are so constricting, you are so critical, you are so judgmental, you are such a control freak. Like, let us out and let us have some fun, right? And so that's how those wars That's how those wars get created. But if you can look at that as how can I get these two parts of me to cooperate together, then the part of me that wants adventure, if it totally tunes out the part of me that wants to keep me safe, that may not be a good thing, right? So if they could have rapport with each other, like seriously, like your mind, your parts of yourself get out of rapport with each other. They get offended at each other. They become enemies. So it's just like, it's no different than with someone else. It's no different than blocking somebody on Facebook. You know, you get into an altercation and it's unpleasant and you just don't want to deal with the negative energy and you're like, that's not why I'm on Facebook anyway. And so you block that person, right? Well, we do that internally all the time. And the problem is that all of those ego states are trying to do something positive for us as a whole.
They're trying to protect us, or they're trying to encourage us to get out of our nest. They are all wanting our best interests, but they sound so conflicting that we feel like we have to choose one or the other. So how do we bring them to the table and sit them down and hear them out? How do we do that?
Yeah. So one of the things that we do in therapy is actually exactly that in the imagination. We'll have them sit at a table and get a couple of empty chairs and say, okay, I want you to project an image in your mind or whatever, however you do that best. I want you to externalize in whatever way your mind can do it, the part of you that wants to play it safe in this chair. And I want you to externalize the part of you that wants to have adventure in this chair. And you're sitting in the seat of what we might call the executive self. In other words, you're the executive. You're the one that makes the final decision here. And so what you want to do from that place of being the executive is you want to gather information. So talk to this part. And because we all do this. I mean, if you think about it, every night that you dream, the characters that you interact with in your dreams are not physically present. Your mind is completely generating that. All those interactions. So you're kind of dreaming while you're awake. You're like creating this part of you that wants safety, this part of you that wants adventure, and you're interacting with them almost like you would in a dream state. And so, okay, so the part of me that wants to play it safe, tell me about what you want from me. Well, you know, when we were young and Dad was so much bigger than we were, and he just, you know, if we didn't do something, he would just grab us by the hair and make us do that. And it was so painful. Or we stepped out, you know, we thought it would be cool to ask this girl out on a date. And we called her up and asked her out. Not only did she laugh at us, but she told all of her friends, and they were laughing at us the next day as well. And so, you know, we want the predictable. We want to be able to predict the outcome, because that keeps us from having pain. It won't come out that sophisticated because these parts are usually younger. So it'll come out, you know, like the 11-year-old or the 15-year-old or whatever that happened.
No, I don't want to do it. I don't.
Yeah, exactly. And then, okay, so I'm gathering information from that, and then going to the next part and gathering information. Okay, what is it about adventure? Hold on one second. My son just got home. Hey, that is cool, buddy. Hey, I'm on a Facebook Live, so can I come up and talk to you in a minute? You wanna be on?
Hey, so great to see you. Thanks for saying hi. Hey.
Okay, let me finish. All right, buddy. Bye. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, are you okay? Oh, he just ran into it. Are you all right? Okay. I have a grandfather clock. He's right into it running out.
Oh.
So talk about children getting hurt, right? I mean, it was perfect time. So then I want to gather information from this part of me as well. And then I might have to negotiate a truce.
Yeah.
Between the two and say, okay, so this is where you get out of that either I play it safe or I have adventure. Well, how about you safely have adventure? How about that?
Beautiful. Brilliant. I love it.
And I mean, that's just a very simple way. You can get two empty chairs in your mind, project those parts of yourself out there, and there's no wrong way to do it. You know, you're getting that information, you're getting that self-knowledge as you're going through that. And the key is when an answer like sort of comes back to you, the key is to take that answer, even if it doesn't make sense, take that answer without second guessing it, because more than likely that is that part of you that's answering, even if it doesn't make sense. Because again, these parts might think like children, or they may have a completely different perspective than what you've allowed yourself to have, even as sort of the executive self, if you will, that will challenge your thinking and give you a broader understanding of who you are, but also a bigger picture perspective on decisions or things that you're doing in your life.
Yes, beautiful. When you say executive self, do you see that as your sort of the part of you that it steps back, can step back and just observe yourself? So your higher consciousness connection, or however you want to say it, observing you having these discussions. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in most of our audience, right, is going to be into spirituality and whatever, and understand, you know, concepts of higher self or Christ self or who you are in Christ, or, you know, whatever perspective they're coming from. So that brings an added resource, right, an added dimension to that. But ultimately, when I'm referring to the executive self, I'm talking about the self that makes choice. So really, I'm talking about the will.
Right. And then otherwise you've got the classic, I just want God's will. I just want God's will. But no, that I've seen people that say that, but they never actually step into that executive position of choosing. They think they're letting God's will be done, but they're actually just operating in a default.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Which is so sad. You know, the example that I think of is I traveled so much for, 15, 20 years or so, that I became familiar with how awful it was going to be to sit on a plane and then another overnighter, to get to Africa or what have you. And it got to the point where if I knew I was going to, I was like, I can't take it, because I knew what I was in for. You know what I mean? But at times like that, I had to remind myself, when I can't do something, I'm finding it's helpful to remind myself of all the ways that I have been able to trust myself in the past and see myself come through for myself. Would you think that is important, to take that inventory of all the ways that we prove to ourselves and have proved to ourselves how reliable we really are, so that we don't get in a loop of, I'm useless?
Yeah, it's interesting that you present it that way, Michelle, because well, as you know, one of my jobs is, hey, my other son.
Hey, we meet the family tonight. That's great.
One of my other jobs is working at a university, so as a counselor, and so I'm counseling young adults who are in a developmental stage where they're just beginning to get some autonomy in their life. They don't have a lot of experiences of success. They don't have a lot of experiences of independence, much less experiences of, I independently made this choice and it worked out for me. And you may have people who are older who have just had a lot of bad experiences, right? Maybe they made a lot of mistakes. Maybe they weren't the cause of their own misfortune. But they can begin to feel like, doesn't matter what I do, around the corner something bad's going to happen again. I'm just waiting for the next shoe to drop, that kind of thing. So if you have the years and the experience where you can prove to yourself, hey, I had the resources to get through this situation, I made the right decision here, I had success here, then absolutely that is a huge resource for you. But there are a lot of people that don't have that yet.
Yeah. So you have to find something,
So
right? You just find you find what you can to remind yourself how you made the right decision here, you made the right decision there.
Yeah. Or we learn not to take our mistakes so seriously.
Right.
And I know that can be hard, especially if you've made really what you might perceive as costly mistakes. I spent 20 some odd years in an abusive marriage. You know,
Right.
I lost that many years. Or, um, you know, heaven forbid, hopefully there's nobody listening that this ever happened to, but maybe you made a mistake or felt like you made a mistake that really damaged somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you were a driver in a car accident and somebody got killed,
Right.
or something like that. Maybe you were drinking and driving and somebody got killed, and
Yeah.
you know, you can live a lifetime of shame and regret off that one mistake and lose all trust in yourself.
Right. I think, you know, some interestingly, and I just noticing as you're saying that, a little note that I made where I wrote this down earlier on, and I never occurred to me that perhaps I've done this to myself, perhaps people watching have done this to themselves, that if you have experienced mistreatment, it's very real for the person that's experienced it. And it's not something you want to suppress. And I wrote down, become aware of when you gaslight yourself.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
good.
I have. I mean, I've experienced being gaslit, and then I realized, wait a minute, I have I have joined with that voice many times
Wow.
and gaslit myself.
Wow.
And I wrote, become aware of cognitive dissonance and be willing to ask questions that can ease you into that authentic personal clarity. So, oh, you know, just learning to just sit with the questions, learning to sit with the pain, realizing there is no light or darkness, all is light. It's just a question of welcoming it in to that light and allowing it to integrate. But a few words on that, the process of sitting in the pain, the process of not gaslighting yourself and allowing yourself to feel your feelings, which would be my next point, listening to your feelings.
Yeah, you know, I would love to bounce that question back to you,
Yeah.
Michelle, because you have processed that. Like what was that process like for you when you were recognizing it and then working
Yeah,
through it?
it's it gets easier as you go, but it absolutely requires you to sit and feel the pain and allow it and be with it and not want to rush it away and invite it in to ask you what it wants to tell you. And the more you can handle of that, and it's not for the faint-hearted, and I did so much of that alone, and I realized, wow, that was kind of crazy, but I made it through, and I continue to process alone. But if you do you've got to find someone that's really going to be a sounding board and not just an advice giver and fixer. But if you can process it with a group, you know, there's sitting with pain. I think for me, because I'm a poet, I was able to transmute a lot actually through words and expression. And I did that as a choreographer when I was younger. So for me, I found a creative outlet which helped. So I would suggest to anybody, move, you know, walk, dance, don't worry about what it looks like, paint, free write a lot, and be willing to sit curled or be curled up in a fetal position in the corner and ask yourself what your tears mean. What do my tears want to tell me? Because there's so many different kinds of tears and they have so many different messages.
Yeah, and sometimes those parts just want to be heard, right?
Right.
They just want somebody to give their burden to, so to speak, and you can do that for yourself.
You can. I want people to know that you can do that. I don't think it takes so much guts and determinations. It just takes willingness to carve out space and know it's not going to be fun and easy, but if you can sit with it, you will. I wrote a poem once called Poison to Gold, and I saw it like the strychnine of pain that's in your veins. If you can allow it to become like an inoculation, like a you know, it can turn that pain into gold right there within you. It's possible.
It's good
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, what about listening to, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I found in my own life that my emotions tend to be like little kids, that if I don't pay attention to them, they get louder.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'll give my attention to them and listen to them, hear their stories, so to speak, hear the messages, that oftentimes just being present with those feelings will cause those feelings to calm down a little
Right.
bit. But if I ignore them, put them away, don't sit with them, they get like my kids, that I'm not giving them enough attention, and pretty soon they get louder. Pretty soon they start acting out in negative ways to try to get attention. And I've found with myself and with people that sometimes our emotions are very much like that. Sometimes just giving your attention to the feeling will cause the feeling to calm down a little bit.
Yeah, because it could have been the attention you didn't get when your parents were too busy or they were acting in a neglectful way. So this is such an important issue, isn't it? So it's not just sort of sitting, it's like reparenting yourself, where there was where you see a pattern, where you see, or even if you can identify from your childhood or from a place in your life where the trauma came in, we have, if we can possibly have the opportunity to, okay, my parent didn't do that for me, but I can do that for myself. I can reparent myself in that area and remind myself I am, my mantra, my three were welcome, wanted, and enough.
That's really good.
Yeah, because I realized that I felt like a typical British nuisance, that I just took up too much space. And that I wasn't really wanted, and that I wasn't good enough. So I just, did that. I meditated through welcome, wanted, and enough, which is probably everyone's most typical ones. But yeah, reparenting ourselves. What about listening to our feelings? Because they have valuable information to share. And I know this is a new one for a lot of people, but our body is speaking to us. Our body has an intelligence that is very much wanting to let us know what's going on. And by the way, before I forget, a therapist that I worked with once did a wonderful exercise where if you take a crayon in the hand, the opposite hand of the one you normally write with, so the one that's not typically able to write, and you can ask, little girl, 5-year-old, little Michelle, what do you want to say? And you write with the crayon with the hand that doesn't typically write well. It will tell you profound things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have. That's interesting.
And I don't know what the switch is about not writing with your typical hand, perhaps because that's your default. And you just, like, for me, it's my right hand. I write with my right hand and I can free write and tell myself incredible wisdom and information that I need to know. But when I applied that, taking the crayon and writing with the hand that's not comfortable to write with, and asking specifically, 5-year-old Michelle, what do you want to tell me right now? And it was mind-blowing.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to mess around with that a little bit.
Oh, well,
Right.
let's talk about emotions. And I know you must be so tired. A couple more things. Emotions being the carriers of our personal truth, a reflection of the various perspectives of the various parts of us that the parts of us are holding. How can we work with those emotions and our body intelligence?
Yeah. So it's interesting. There was a major study done by one of the universities. It's been a long time since I looked at it, so I can't remember, that many specifics. But they took recordings. Really interesting. They took recordings of therapy sessions, and they listened to the person receiving the therapy. So they were listening to the client, and they were also looking at therapeutic outcomes. Did this person feel like they got better? Did their life improve? And what they were originally trying to do was identify what therapeutic interventions worked the best. And so the blind on the study was, you were just listening to the client talk. You didn't necessarily know what intervention or what the therapist was saying or doing. Completely blind to that part of it in the study. And what they discovered was shocking, What they discovered was that success in therapy really did not matter the therapist or the intervention. What mattered was how in tune the person was with their own bodies. That was the biggest deciding factor in terms of whether or not the therapy was effective. So I always tell people, you think with your brain, your thoughts are in your head, but your feelings are in your body. And it's amazing, almost inevitably, when someone's talking about an emotion, I will say, where do you feel that? And they will look bewildered because they're not aware that they're even experiencing it in their body. But literally, if you're feeling anything, your body is involved.
Yes.
Whether it's physical or emotional pain that you're feeling.
Right.
You're feeling it somewhere. And so, number one, if you don't allow yourself to feel, or you're not aware, you're not even aware, I'm anxious. Well, where do you feel anxious? Or I'm depressed. Well, where do you feel that depression? Well, I can't feel it out here. I can't feel it as something other than me. So I've got to be feeling it. So just getting them to describe it in non-emotional language, but in real tactile feeling language. What is that? It's feels like it's on my chest. It feels heavy, or it's in my throat and it feels like it's choking me and I can't speak. It feels tight. It feels restricting. It feels sharp. It feels dull. It feels cold. It feels hot. That kind of stuff helps a person get more into their bodies. Number one. Number two, what I would say is that your emotions are not always, in fact, they seldom are accurate indicators of what's going on in reality in the world outside of you. But they are important and accurate messages about what's going on within you, and specifically about what you really believe. And see, this is tricky for Christians because we're taught, I just believe the Bible, I believe the word. Well, the truth is you're using typically with most people what would be the left hemisphere of the brain because it's language. Right. And then you're taught to ignore your feelings, like the whole, I don't know if you ever remember they used to have an illustration that Campus Crusade for Christ used to use of the choo-choo train. Facts was the engine, Bible facts, and then faith was the car, and then feelings were the caboose, right? But the truth is, again, from a psychological perspective, what separates a belief from a feeling is the emotional investment in the thought. I'm sorry. What separates a belief from a thought is the feeling. And so your feelings actually tell you what you really believe.
Wow. Oh, God.
And so, again, it's key to that self-knowledge, right? So if I'm believing for my healing, but I'm scared to death to go to the doctor because I'm afraid of what the doctor is going to tell me, I'm not believing for healing at all. Not at all. I'm just copying what I was taught to do and what I was taught to believe in church. But what's really going on inside of me is I'm scared to death. And I remember so-and-so, they tried believing and it didn't work, and maybe that could be me too. And so without diving into your feelings, you really don't know what you actually believe. So what I would say is feelings are not, they're seldom very accurate indicators of the reality of the situation that you're facing. They're always accurate indicators of what's going on inside of you, especially in terms of what you believe.
So the fastest we can get to the truth of that, get to the honesty of what it is that we're feeling, we're going to connect the dot to what we're believing. Yeah. And then we can begin to rewrite that belief utilizing a new feeling. And I got to tell you, I love what you just said. I've proven this so many times at many age levels, because as an acting teacher, a very regular exercise that you'll do, a warm-up exercise that you'll do, and I didn't put two and two together until a few years ago, but an acting exercise might be that you feel a certain emotion, right? You list out different emotions. You ask the students to stand, face a place where they're not looking at anybody else. They close their eyes, and you ask them to embody an emotion at all kinds of ages. And I've done this as young as 10-year-olds. And then I ask those 10-year-olds,
Wow.
where do I only want to know what one thing, tell me where you feel the emotion. And 10-year-olds on this exercise will say, my chest, my forehead,
Right.
my arms. And they're very serious about it. They absolutely are able. And I say, okay, cancel that, shake that off. We're going to do another emotion. Then they'll feel it in a different place, proving that you can choose your emotion. You first of all, you can identify a negative emotion or an emotion that you don't want to be experiencing. You can find out what's at the bottom of it. In other words, the actor's backstory, because we're all actors in our own story, right? You can find out what's the actor's backstory that's causing that sensation, and then you can actually choose. I mean, it's powerful stuff.
That is
I
very
really
powerful.
ought to do like spiritual therapy through acting, because it's a wonderful way to get in touch with, the truth of what's going on. So we want to get really honest about that. And once you've gotten honest about what's going on, what's a step that can shift you now toward healthy self-trust that can be built upon from that point forward? And we'll kind of wrap up there.
Okay. So let me see if I've got the question correct. So once you get honest about what's really going on inside of you, how do you shift then to healthy self-trust? What's interesting about that is, in order to get to that place, you've already practiced self-trust.
Wow.
Because if I believe, well, yeah, but I mean, like, if you think about it, if I do this kind of work and I let a part of me express itself, right, then I have the part of me that's expressed itself has trusted the part of me that allowed that expression. Right. And then if I can sit there and think, okay, this situation occurs, like I used to, it's kind of weird for people that know me in my real life, that they always look at me strange when I say this, unless they knew me in high school. But I had a lot of social anxiety clear up into my mid-30s. And I would just identify it as social anxiety. And I went through some NLP training, neuro-linguistic programming, and one of the things we were doing was you have to pick, and it's great in one regard. It's great because you're getting lots of free therapy and self-improvement. It's really horrible on the other side is that you have to pick problems to work on. And so I was working on this whole issue of social anxiety. And one of the things they teach you in NLP is to get very specific about your problem, because what keeps us bound sometimes is we're so generalized with it. So I was very generalized. I have social anxiety. And so just working with one of the other, people that was learning, not even one of the trainers, and they're like, well, when specifically do you get social anxiety? And I had to think about it. And I realized that when I got it the worst, and usually when I got it, I didn't get it when I was with people that I knew, that knew me. I didn't get it around family. I didn't get it I didn't get it public speaking, because I was already very proficient at public speaking. And I began to identify where I specifically get social anxiety is when there is an older male role model or mentor or authority figure that I look up to. So I was able to identify the exact context in which that happened. And then the question becomes, okay, where did you learn to be afraid of male authority figures? And I will never forget it, Michelle. I will never forget it, because all of a sudden this wave of pain just felt like it started in my toes. I've never experienced this before or since, where like just this wave of emotion that like started in my feet just went all the way up my body and just took me. And I realized it was my father. My father was very critical. My father was very, at times, demanding. He went through a season in his life when he was an alcoholic, so he was very unpredictable at times. And I was the only boy. And so I realized, oh, this is my dad. And then I was able to be aware I'm literally projecting my dad, or that part of me, to go back to what I said before, that part of me that learned how to stay safe, associated the danger with older role model male authority figures.
Wow.
So my brain was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The problem was not everybody was my dad. And so that kind of self-knowledge, and then allowing myself to feel that and experience that and identify that, cured that problem. I didn't have that problem ever again after that day. Now there are certain contexts, of course, where I might feel nervous, or I might feel a little bit anxious in various different social settings, but nothing like what I used to experience up until, that moment in time in my life. And so that was an exercise in self-trust. And again, counsel in the heart of man being like deep waters, because there's no way the person learning in this training could know that about me.
Right.
So if nothing else, if people take nothing else away from this, and maybe you're out there listening or watching and you're saying, I don't have any semblance of self-trust. I'm that person you were talking about that feels like I always make mistakes. I always screw things up. Bad things always happen to me. If you could take this belief frame that you are the expert on yourself and your own experience. Nobody else is the expert on you. Nobody else walks in your shoes. Nobody else has lived every minute of your life. And your mind has stored way more information than you give it credit for. And that is a resource for you. That information is a resource for you that is extremely trustworthy. It is way more trustworthy for me to be able to identify for myself. I get social anxiety when I'm around older male authority figures. And I get that because I remember all those times that my dad, things got crazy with my dad. There is no way a therapist or a trainer or a book or a spiritual director or a pastor or anybody in the helping business could tell me that about myself.
Right.
They could give me some textbook. Well, social anxiety is caused by the amount of significance that you give to the situation, and I forget the other factor.
Right.
But like if it's important to you, that will increase your social anxiety. And let's say, your past successes in those situations are failures. Well, I don't have a lot of past successes to draw from. It's very important. Okay, that might be helpful information, but it can't give me the precise structure and information about my own experience like I can. And so if you can just begin to believe I am the only expert on myself, therefore I am the expert at living my own life. The problem is I've got vast resources of information that I've never tapped into because number one, nobody's ever taught me. And number two, nobody's ever taught me.
That is
Nobody's ever taught me that.
Empowering. What a way to finish up. You are the expert on yourself, and all of the information that you need is within you. Ask. You'll find the answers. When you feel uncomfortable, seek to find the root of that, right? The feeling, the emotion's going to tell you what you believe. I mean, this is so powerful. Just knowing, friends, isn't it so empowering to know we are the experts on ourselves, and we don't need to be, we can gain counsel and information from others, but ultimately we've got what it takes. We're equipped, we're designed specifically with everything that we need to be the authority in our life. Yeah, beautiful, amazing. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
for being here. It's been an incredible conversation, really. Friends, please share this out. I know that many people will benefit, and this is information that we all need to be able to grow stronger in ourselves, to operate in that autonomy and stop giving our power away. My new thing is, the new take back your power is not to give it away to begin with.
That's good.
Any last words, Erin, and we'll finish up.
I really don't, Michelle. I appreciate your work. I appreciate all that you do to help people and encourage people, and to help people find their path and trust their voice and find healing. And all the content that you put out is always filled with wisdom and encouragement. And so I just want to let you know how much I appreciate the work you do.
Oh, thank you so much. We're all just helping each other find our way home, right? So good. Thank you, Erin. God bless everyone. Good night.
You bet. Good night.